For those that don't know, she was that person in the prayer, Adam Hando. That was a fella who we've been praying for a long time, and it was a family that were attending our church until they moved away because he needed a kidney and pancreas transplant, which he was able to get last weekend for those that aren't on the prayer chain. So it's just a great blessing and something to be really happy about. And please continue to pray for the Hando family as he continues to receive his kidney and pancreas, and it's just something to praise God for, isn't it? But I love a good compliment. Compliments are great, aren't they? Yeah, it's just makes you feel good, don't they? And there's sort of two types of compliments that you get. There's compliments when people just see you and they're just sort of like, oh, you're looking good today, or they're like, oh, you're a nice person. And it's just, you can't really do anything about getting that compliment, like it's just a compliment that happens. Then there's the compliments that happen after you've just done something, after you've just done a project, after you've just done an assignment at school maybe you've just performed really well in a sports field or something like that. And it's when people have that kind of compliment that says, you did really well today, or you were so good at doing that today, or how good was your singing this morning, or how good was the amount of work and effort you put into that and the result you got from that. That's fantastic, isn't it? So I think compliments are great, but they're the two kind of compliments. There's the ones we can't really do much to earn, and then there's the ones we get after we've put a lot of work into something, after we've done something. So I should mention, side point, I've still got my sermon points on the Bible app for those people that like following along on that. Alternatively, though, we like good compliments. We like compliments when we put a lot of work into something and then we see the results. A bit like how great work Orally did at the Lane sale this last week, and we got $1,300 for it. We love to hear what people say, how good of a job we did then. But then there's another type of comment we can get, and it's those type of comments when we don't put a lot of hard work into something. Those kind of comments where perhaps we're a bit lazy in what we're doing, maybe we leave something a little bit late, maybe we just don't feel like up to it today, so then we go and partake in something. Maybe you're playing a sport and you didn't do that good of a job, and it gets to a point at the end of a day, at the end of that, where we have to receive feedback, or we're talking about how we went with that. And I know how good compliments feel, but how awful does it feel when you might be getting feedback and someone says, you didn't quite do as good as you were able to today, did you? Maybe it was back when you were at school. I know I've maybe had a couple times where I didn't put all of my effort into an assignment. Maybe I procrastinated or something, and the teacher would be like, you didn't do the best of your ability on this today. And it was never a good feeling. You never walked out thinking, gee, I feel good after not putting in a full 100%. You never feel good after that, do you? Today, as we're continuing through the parables of Jesus, we're looking at a number of different parables. We're looking at the parable of the talents, and we're looking at a response that we get from Jesus at the very end of our life, and we get to see what it looks like. But we need to ask the question before we go there, is why do we do some things to the best of our ability, and why do we do some things not to the best of our ability? Is there a reason, if we're capable of doing something to 100%, why sometimes do we only give 80%? Why sometimes do we only give 50%? Why sometimes do we not bother at all? And there's a number of different reasons when it comes down to it. Procrastination could be a reason, laziness could be a reason, lack of motivation could be a reason. So there's all these different reasons that come to why we don't put our best foot forward, and why sometimes we get to the end of something and it's not to the best of our ability. And I think that it could all be pushed down to one word, to one reason. And I think when it comes down to it, as I was reflecting on this and trying to reflect of times that I haven't performed to the best of my ability, I think it comes down to selfishness. Sometimes we don't like to do something because we feel lazy, but that's because we want to put what we want to do first and not those other things that we need to put effort in. Maybe we want to spend more time watching Netflix on the couch. Maybe we want to spend more time reading a book. Maybe we want to spend more time doing something that isn't that project that we're meant to be doing. And that's selfishness, isn't it? Procrastination is the exact same thing. You can almost put that and laziness in like a cinnamon column there. But procrastination, it's when we prefer doing something that we want to do and putting off something that we don't want to do. So all of a sudden it comes back to selfishness, doesn't it? Even some things like lack of motivation, it's that idea of we're not wanting to do something because we don't feel like doing it. So I think all of these reasons, as I was trying to think of all the different reasons to why we don't do things to the best of our ability, it often comes down to selfishness. So we can be guilty of this a lot today, can't we? I know I've been guilty of this. I say there's still things that I do today that I reflect on. I think, oh gee, I didn't quite do as well as I could have possibly done on that. So we like to do things on our terms. We like to do things when it suits us. We like to do things when we feel like doing it. And that's because that's the message of the world today. That's what everything's shouting at us in this world. It's saying that that's when we do it. We do things when it suits us, on our time, when we're ready to do it. Before we even commit to something, we like to sum up in our mind. We like to think, well, what's that going to cost me?
How much of my time is that going to cost? How much of my effort is that going to cost me? And before we commit to anything, we start thinking of what it will cost us and how it affects us, and if it's something that we really want to do. So as I said, we're continuing the parables of Jesus today, and there is a powerful challenge in this parable. I've found just preparing this sermon, it's one we could just read to ourselves, maybe over and over again, and something new pops out, something highlights in this parable, but there's a real powerful message that we see. And I think it's a really timely message, because as this church has reopened, as many churches across the world have been reopening in the wake of COVID normal, we're seeing some interesting statistics. We're seeing some interesting developments that happen, and it's been interesting. I've been sharing with other pastor friends about what we're seeing at our church, and they're seeing the same thing. I would have thought that we'd all be different, but it's very similar, not just in Australia either, but other people in all sorts of different countries. One of the trends I thought we'd see, and it's definitely says, most churches are only getting about somewhere between 50 to 70% of returned attendance. So all of a sudden, instead of getting droves coming back, I almost thought we'd get like 120% return at one point, thinking everyone just wants to get back into church. But as you may have looked around at services, we have more empty seats, not purely because of social distancing, but because there's just not as many people in the room. So we have seen a lot of people not coming. And that one doesn't surprise me quite as much in some ways, because it's comfortable to sit and watch church online. It's more accessible than ever before, and we can watch church when we want to watch church. There's an element where I can see that maybe that's why not as many people are coming back. There's one stat that surprised me a lot more, though, however, than the coming back of attendance, and that is the people engaging in serving in the local church. And this is a stat you see just about at every church again. But churches are finding that just about nobody, well, not nobody, but there is a huge decline in the people wanting to serve in the local church. A massive decline. People that served before the pandemic don't want to serve after the pandemic. People that did a few things before the pandemic don't want to do anywhere near as much after the pandemic. And people that have never served before are still not willing to serve as they come back to church. And it's just a really interesting trend, I think, to see, that people are not wanting to serve. And maybe it is because we've had a year cooped up, not coming and giving of our time and giving of those different things. But I think it could just be more of a reflection of where culture is at the moment. But it's interesting today as we look at this parable. And parables are awesome because they show us if we've been talking about the character of God, but they also give us an idea of what the kingdom of heaven is like. And we think about this saying at church, on earth as it is in heaven. And Jesus is giving us these lessons so that we can help this world be more like the kingdom of heaven. And there's a great challenge packed in this parable today about how we use our time, how we use our gifts, how we use our wealth, and how Jesus wants us to use that. If you're a follower of Jesus, I hope there's a challenge packed inside of this message for you today. I hope there's a real encouraging message about how you use your gifts, how you use your gifts to influence others and to honour God. If you're not a follower of Jesus today, I hope you can discover a great lesson in stewardship, but you can also ask the question, have I been given gifts? Has God created me? Do I have a purpose and a way to impact this world around me? And I hope if you're not a follower of Jesus, you can begin to ask those sort of questions and wrestle with them today. But you'll find this parable that we're going to begin reading in Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 to 30. And as you'll see, it is a little bit of a longer one, but it's a really good parable. So we see this. It says, again, I'll just read it off here, sorry. It says again, so he's continuing. He's just told one parable, and now he's going straight into another parable. And they obviously have a very similar meaning the way he says again. He says again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. So we see there's a man going away, and as he goes away, he gathers his servants together. He brings them in and he says, I need you guys to look after my wealth. Now, over 2,000 years ago, I don't think banks were a simple option where he could have just put his money in the bank, gone on a journey and had it there. So obviously he needed someone to look after his wealth for him. So that's what he does. He asks his servants, he says, come in. And he asked his servants to leave some wealth behind. And we see exactly what he left behind for each servant. It says in verse 15, he says, to one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. So we see exactly what he's left. He hasn't split it up into 3 even amounts. But what he's done is he's given different amounts of gold to different amounts of servants, so according to their ability. Each according to their ability. He knew what they were each capable of. He knew what they were each able to look after. So that's how he decided who he was giving it to. It wasn't just a random throw it out. Now, depending on which, we call it the parable of the talents, because earlier translations of this say talents when they're talking about what he gives them. This translation in the NIV now has bags of gold. See, a talent, what they think that this was probably worth, was a talent was worth 20 years of an average day's wage. So that's a lot of money. This is a pretty rich fella that's giving of his wealth. It's not just a talent like $5,000 or something like that, but it's 20 years of an average day's wage. So he's entrusting a lot of his wealth to these servants. And he entrusted them with his wealth according to their ability. It continues in verse 16. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went out at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. It's kind of a cool story. It's like you're watching one of those movies and he gives out the money and then it hits the montage mode and all of a sudden you see what they're doing with their money, you see what's happened, and it fast forwards really quickly and we see straight away what happens with his money. We see the guy with 5 earned 5 more. We see the guy that got 2 earned 2 more. They're doing pretty well. They've doubled what he's given them. And then we see the man that got 1 hid it away and put it in the ground. So this guy's probably going to be pretty stoked with the 2 guys that doubled it. But if you're just asking someone to look after something, if you're entrusting your wealth to someone and they give back everything that you had, you can't be too disappointed, right? You'd be a bit harsh to think that that's not a good thing when you get exactly what you gave someone back to you. It's pretty good that there's no just even $10 note just sitting away from it when you look at how much he's given. But the guy hid it and he got exactly what he was given. I mean, he kept it safe, that one person. So we see the master returns. It says, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. And the master said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have 5 more. And his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. The master's stoked. He's really excited. And then we see the one with 2. The man with 2 bags also came and he said, Master, you entrusted me with 2 bags and see, look, I've doubled it. I've got 2 more bags. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. Now, there's no surprise here. We knew that the master was going to be pretty stoked when he got double what he gave someone else. If I gave $20 to anyone and they gave me $40 back, I'll be giving them $40 back again straight away, I reckon, just so you can always get double. So he's pretty stoked. But then we get to see what happens with the one who gave him 1 bag of gold. And as I said, he's looked after it. He returns him 1 bag of gold. So I reckon he's within his right to hope that the master's going to be at least pretty happy with him. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you were a hard man, harvesting where you had not sown and gathering where you had not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken away from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Wow. That's pretty harsh, isn't it? That seems very extreme. Adjectives to go with the words like you wicked and lazy, worthless we see towards the end. They're very extreme adjectives for somebody who returned exactly what the master gave to him, isn't it? It almost seems pretty harsh. This is why this is such a powerful parable. See, his master wasn't happy. His master was angry. We can look at it and interpret this parable, and we can see God clearly represented here as the master. Remember I said you can look in different parables and you can see where God is represented in these parables and you can see where we're represented. And this one's a fairly easy one to work out, that God is the master in this parable. And we can put ourselves into these parables and we can notice that we are the servants entrusted with wealth. Now we can look at this as purely just money. We can look at this as the money that we receive and how we're to look after money. But as we know, parables that show representations of things, it goes deeper than that. It means so much more than money. So I think it's the gifts that we get given to us in our lives. It's the talents that we have. It can be the time that we have. It can be the wealth as well that's given to us. It can be so many more things that we have entrusted to us. So we need to reflect, which we're about to do, is how are we using the wealth that's been entrusted to us? How are we using the gifts that God has entrusted to us? How are we using the time that God has entrusted to us? I'd even go as far as saying we could apply the principles of this parable. If you're somebody that manages a business, how are we working with the people that are entrusted to us underneath us? If you have a family, how are you, the children that you have entrusted to you, how are you honouring the children that you have entrusted to you? So you can go so deep, the principles of this parable. How do you use what God has entrusted to you? So the main reason that this master is unhappy, he's not happy that the man returned exactly what he gave to him, but it says that the master gave each according to their ability. So this master in this story knew exactly what this servant was capable of. He knew that this servant was capable of returning another bag, that he was capable of doubling it, just like the other two servants he gave. So he knew that the servant he gave 5 was capable of getting 5 more. So he was happy. Well done, good and faithful servant. He knew that the servant that he gave 2 bags was capable of getting 2 more. So again, he was happy. Well done, good and faithful servant. And he knew that the servant that he gave 1 bag was capable of producing another bag on top of what he gave him. But he didn't, so he couldn't say, well done, good and faithful servant. So he was angry because that guy didn't do what God knew he was capable of. He didn't reach that calling that God knew that he had given him. So we can ask ourselves that exact same question. With the gifts that God has entrusted you, with the time and the talents that God has entrusted you, with the wealth that God has entrusted you, are you using that to the best of your ability? When we get to that point where we come back and we get to see Jesus again, which we'll talk about in a minute, but do you think we'll get to reflect and will we hear, well done, good and faithful servant? Or will we hear, you wicked, lazy servant? Because all of us in this world, all of us that follow Jesus, we are serving the Lord. We're serving the Lord in our workplaces. We're serving the Lord in our families. We're serving the Lord in our friendship groups. And we've all got so many different gifts that we can use in a number of different ways. And we can use those gifts. I truly believe that many of these gifts have been given to us to serve the people of this world, that God gives us particular gifts. You see people that are so talented at different things. We've got people at this church that are so talented musically. And there's no way I'll be able to get up and play an instrument, be able to lead people to singing along with these songs and really enjoying them. But we've got some great people like our worship deacon Isaac or anyone in our band today playing instruments that do a great job of that, and they're using those gifts that they have to bless others, to help point people to Jesus. You might be someone who's a real people person who just loves being around people. So how are you making sure that you can use those gifts to help bring people to Jesus, to help host people in a great way, to help point people to Jesus in a way? So we could talk about all the different gifts and go through all the different gifts that we've got. But I think for a lot of us, we know the gifts that we have. We know the things that we might be using for God's kingdom, and we know the things that we might be holding back from using for God's kingdom. So God has placed us in so many different contexts, and he knows what we are capable of. And he wants to see us using these things for his glory, for his kingdom. So as we look at this, I want to give us 3 just simple reminders to draw out of this parable. 3 things that will hopefully just help us to remember to use our gifts. 3 things that will hopefully empower us to use the gifts that have been given to us, so that the gifts that have been entrusted to us, so that hopefully we're reminded to use these well, so that when we get to a point in our lives where we can reflect on it, we can hear, well done, good and faithful servant. And then we do not hear, you wicked, lazy servant. The first one is renew your mind. Renew your mind. There's a little Bible verse to go with each and every one of these. And this one's in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. It simply says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Renew your mind. I love, particularly in this part of Romans, how it says, do not conform with the patterns of this world. And as we're talking about serving, as we're talking about sacrifice of our time and our gifts, conforming with the pattern of this world would be giving in to that selfishness. Conforming to the pattern of this world would be making sure that this is my time, I'm not giving it to anyone else, or what do I get out of serving in the local church? What do I get out of going and helping out my friends so that he can hear about the love of Jesus if there's a chance? What do I get out of every opportunity? So that's conforming to this world. So we need to renew our minds so we're not constantly thinking about that. We need to renew our minds so we can love God and love others, so that we can have that same heart that Jesus had. Paul uses strong words as he's talking about renewing our mind, because he says, don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed. Transformation means that there's got to be a change in us. Transformation means something's changing within us, so that we are not conforming to this world and acting in a different way. So we're trying to be more and more like Jesus. So we're renewing our mind. We're trying to make sure that our mind can be more and more like Jesus' mind, that we're applying principles that we're learning about as we look in each of these different parables. So we need to constantly be renewing our mind. And there's a huge challenge there to make sure we're constantly doing it. I know we can just go through a simple week where we don't really focus on the Bible. Maybe we skip church a few weeks, we don't pray, and all of a sudden we need to renew our mind again because we're falling into the patterns of this world. And the last thing we're thinking of doing is using our gifts to serve others. So that's renew your mind. The second one is recognise your calling. Recognise your calling. And we'll find this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 17. It says these words. It says, nevertheless, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned to them, just as God has called them. This is the rule I lay down in all the churches. This one's a particularly good one to go back and read that whole chapter. It's got a great challenge in how we use our gifts. But what is God calling you to? Do you believe that God has called each and every one of us into a place that we are, or we're a place that we need to go? Where do you think that God is calling you? And do you need to maybe recognise your calling? When was the last time you really stopped and spent time with God praying, but also listening to see where it is that God has called you? Do you think there's perhaps a reason you've got passions on your heart for particular areas, particular people groups, for particular things? Do you think there's a reason you've got particular gifts in particular areas? And you think God gave those to you because he wants to use them in a particular area? So we need to recognise our calling. We need to see where we are called to. So I think it takes a lot of reflection sometimes to see, well, what is it God is calling to me at the moment? Because there'll be different periods of your life where God might be calling you somewhere, and you're called to a slightly different area. So for a lot of my time at this church, I've been in the kids and youth ministry, and a lot of my time on the week has been at Adventure Club and doing lots of kids stuff and running holiday programs, and I'm doing a lot of work in the kids ministry, and I felt that I was very much called to work in the kids ministry. But now at our church, we've got Josh Tonkin and Adele Beasy, and they're doing all sorts of awesome stuff in the kids' ministry. They're doing all sorts of great things with enthusiasm and having all these great different ideas that I never would have had. And all of a sudden, at our church, we've got heaps of young adults. We've got heaps of young adults that are coming to church, that have finished at youth group, and we've got this great group of people that are like in the 18 to 35 bracket. I say 35 so I can keep myself in the young adult bracket instead of 30. But all of a sudden I felt called that all of a sudden I need to stop working in the kids ministry so much, still dabble in there now and then, but focusing on the young adults ministry because we've got so many people there and it's growing, and it's great to be able to build that ministry instead of neglecting it. So if I just stay in a kids ministry where I could say I was called at one time and not continually listen to God and think, well, maybe I need to go and help in young adults ministry, you can be holding back other people that might be ready for that ministry, and you can be neglecting those other spots that are growing. So we need to continually recognise our calling. We need to continually say, God, where is it you want me to use my gifts? God, where is it that you want me to be ministering to other people? And is it the same place I've been doing it for a long time, or could it be somewhere else? So we need to recognise our calling. And the third and the final one is remind yourself of the vision. Remind yourself of the vision. So the fact is, if we don't focus on the reason that we do everything for God, we'll never want to do anything for God. If we don't focus on the reason that God has called us into this world and to love God and love others, then there's no way that we'll actually want to do it. Then we'll be just doing it out of obligation. We'll be doing it out of the fact that we didn't want to say no to someone or let someone down. But you see, it's when we remind ourselves of the vision constantly that we'll constantly want to serve, because we see the bigger picture for why we're doing things. The verse I have for this is Proverbs 29, verse 18. And the original translations use a slightly different word. So in NIV, it's got 29, there it is. Where there is no revelation, people cast off restraint, but blessed is the one who heeds wisdom's instruction. If you go back to one of the main translations of that, and you might have heard this, but it's where there is no vision, the people perish. Where there is no vision, the people perish. And if we're doing things, if we're serving in a certain area and we're not really sure why we do it, if we just rock up, do the job because I've always done this, I might keep doing it, then we'll forget the actual reason that we do it. We need to remember, particularly if we're a member of the Mildura Church of Christ, that we're doing things because we love God. We love to serve God because he gave his one and only Son, Jesus, for us. And because we love God and we follow him and what he told us to do, we also love other people. We love other people because he didn't just give his life for us, but he gave his life for others. And we want them to know that. So we need to completely focus on that calling. We need to focus that Jesus loved us so much and gave his life, that he called us to love others so much so that we can lay our lives down for them. If we don't remember that, these jobs that we do at church will simply just be a job. They'll simply just be a task. Those people that we serve maybe out of this church and we try to preach the love of Christ to them, we won't open our mouths and tell them about Jesus. We won't do that extra yard to show them how loved that they are, because to us it'll just feel like a job. So we need to remind ourselves of the vision. We need to remind ourselves of the vision constantly so we always know exactly why we're doing these things. So we know why we have these gifts that God has given us. Then we know that we have them for a purpose and God has called us to use these things. See, the parable of the talents displays the master Jesus leaving and returning, much like Jesus left this world. Jesus came into this world, like Sandy said so well in communion. He left this world after he lived a life for 33 years, a sinless life. And because he came from heaven, because he gave his life for us, we can have an eternal life in heaven. So the master left this world, but he is coming back. And when we have that opportunity, we don't know exactly when Jesus comes back. It could be tomorrow, it could be very far time from now. When Jesus comes back and we get to see what he entrusted with us, when we get to see the gifts that he has given us, and he comes back to respond, do we want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant? Or do we want to hear, you wicked, lazy servant? I know which one I want to hear when I get to the end. But I just want you to reflect for a moment, what has God entrusted you with? As we close in prayer in just a moment, we're going to have just a moment of silence to think about where God is calling us to think about what God has entrusted with. We need to think, do we need to fight selfishness in our lives? Do we need to fight against some of those things of what we really want to do? Now, there is an element where we also need to remember self-care in a lot of this, and we need to make sure we're not just doing 10 jobs a week and burning ourselves out. But the gifts that God has given us, how are we using those gifts? Are you honouring God with this? Are you investing into God's kingdom? Because when we reflect on the reason God gave us these gifts, do you think God gave us these gifts, our passions, our wealth? Do you think he gave them to us just so that we can live a good life? Just so that we can have a good time in this life that we have on earth? Or do you think that he gave us these gifts so that we can build his kingdom, so that we can help his kingdom grow? Imagine what you can do with what has been entrusted to you. And do we want to hear, you wicked, lazy servant? Or do we want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant? Let's pray. Father, we just thank you so much for every single person here. We thank you for every single person here that knows you and doesn't know you. We thank you for each person watching online today or tomorrow or whenever that may be. And we thank you for them and the gifts you've given them. We just pray for each and every one of us here, you can help us to remember you. You can help us to remember your vision. You can help us to recognise exactly where it is that you want us to serve. You can help show us the gifts that we've got. Help us have confidence in the gifts that we've got so that we can go out and use them. Help us develop the gifts that we've got so we can use them for your kingdom. Help give us confidence if that's all we need to think of a different way, to ask someone to be involved in a certain way. Help give us wisdom to think how it might be that we need to use these gifts. We thank you that you have equipped us in so many great ways, and we pray as we reflect on the parable of the talents, that you can just show us where it is you have called us. You can show us who it is you've called us to in order to point to you, in order to grow your kingdom. Help reveal to us, Lord, your calling.